all the sports. Remember, we're in season 2 now, not season 1 anymore. This is our second episode of season 2, and it's just me, Matt Mlodzinski. Evando Thompson's here with me as well. Rich has a lot going on in the world of Rich Behan, so he deserves a day off. He's done a lot for us here. He hosts pretty much every time, and it's March. That's Maddie Brackett's time. This is my favorite time of the year. So it just seems right that I get to host this March Madness episode. Bringing Evando on because he obviously has a lot of takes as well. And we tend to disagree on a lot about college basketball. So I have a feeling you can get both sides from us today. But Evando, how well are you looking forward to this tournament coming up?
To be honest, with everything that's going on, I'm very excited for this tournament. I feel like there's more than 8 teams that can have a serious shot at making a championship. It's gonna be interesting to see who capitalizes. So yeah, I'm definitely excited. I'm pumped for tomorrow.
We'll give our takes on the bracket in a second, but I know that we both pick our own brackets, as does pretty much everyone in America once it's March. And the thing that I'm kind of struggling with is the whole season. The theme of the season is that anyone can beat anyone. And I'm picking these brackets, and all of a sudden, I'm starting to put a seed to a team, and I'm like, I don't know if this is the right way to do it. It hasn't been like this all season long. I don't know if you're struggling with the same thing.
Nah, that's kind of crazy. I've been trying to reflect on what's been happening in conference tournaments, even in mid-major conferences. Nobody's upsetting people really, other than Georgetown, Oregon State, and Georgia Tech. Like the upper seed is winning a majority of the games. There's like, if you look at the semifinals, there's 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3. There isn't a lot of there isn't a lot of parity as there normally is come this time of year. I don't know if it's because of no fans or what the case may be, but there aren't a lot of those usual random wins that you'd see. So I think that makes harder for making your actual brackets, and I feel like a lot of people are just going to simply default with the upper seed.
We've got a lot to go over today. I guess the main thing that I want to start with is the bracket itself. How do you think the committee did? I thought they did a really good job. Maybe that's a little bit of my bias. I entered my Maddie brackets into the bracket matrix. Did a lot better than last year. Last year I was second to last place, and I realized, you know what? The eye test isn't everything. You have to pay attention to the net rankings and all those metrics. And this year, I was at about the halfway point. I think it was about 125th out of 201. I had 67 of the 68 teams in the field. I seeded 42 of them correctly and 19 of them more within one seed line. So clearly, I was doing pretty well with it. Not as well as some of the other guys. I believe the guy that got first place only had like 6 or 7 off, like totally, or like 4 or 5 off totally. Like he did a really, really crazy job. But I'll go to you now. How do you think the committee did? What are some teams that you maybe think are over or underseeded in this bracket?
I think the committee did a solid part for the most part. I just didn't understand how Michigan State was one of the last 4 in
Yeah.
when they beat like 3-1 seeds, or 2-1s and a 2 seed. But yeah, Michigan State should have clearly been in. They shouldn't be in the playing game right now, and I feel like that's gonna motivate them. And I saw an interesting little stat, like teams that have the most wins as a lower seed, and Michigan State holds that record at 18. So if you guys want a Cinderella, Michigan State is by no means a Cinderella. Go ahead and pick that 11 seed. It's easy. Um, but as far as teams that got overseeded or underseeded, I think Oregon got underseeded. I may be a little biased as an Oregon fan, but they shouldn't have been a 7 seed. They won the Pac-12, a grueling Pac-12, and for most of the year, you had USC and Colorado ranked higher than them. They won it in the regular season, and they ended up losing to the eventual Pac-12 champions, Oregon State, in the semis. That I thought Oregon should have been a little bit higher, and overseeded. Uh, I think that if you're the committee, Georgetown's not a 12. I don't care if they won how many games they won. I know that's the thing when you have like a power conference team that's has such a bad record as they had going into their conference tournament. You win the conference tournament, it's very tricky to see them, but I wouldn't have put them as a 12. I would have put them lower than that, and that may have disrupted the entire forming of other teams that were on that bubble. So That's something I didn't agree with, and I don't think Arkansas is the 3, but maybe they can prove me wrong. I don't. I feel like they could have been on the 4 line. I think Oklahoma State is better than Arkansas, and um, yeah, I wouldn't have put Arkansas in 3.
Oklahoma State's a team that I was thinking about putting on the 2 line. I think I put them on the 3 line in my final bracket. Could be wrong, but I agree with you there. I thought they should have been at least 1 seed up. Even with Oregon, I'll agree with you, Evando. I mean, you look at a BYU or a San Diego State or a Texas Tech, and I think Oregon's resume is better than all 3 of those. They got 6 seeds above the Ducks. One team in particular, I talked about this on the First Whistle podcast, Final Whistle podcast, excuse me, Missouri, getting a 9 seed. I think Missouri has a top 5 resume in this entire tournament. And I know that they're 16-8, but I'll take the people through it. They have a 30-point win over Oral Roberts. Oral Roberts has the top scorer in the country. They limited them to 64 points there in this tournament. They beat your Oregon Ducks by 8. That's obviously a big win. It's not the purpose of me bringing up Missouri, but they beat another team that plays tonight in the first 4. They won at Wichita State by 10 points. Then they beat Liberty, a 13 seed that I have. We'll talk about Oklahoma State. I have Oklahoma State going pretty far. Liberty's an upset pick by a lot of people. Missouri beat them. And then Missouri beat Illinois, who's a 1 seed and a real big pick in this bracket. A lot of people think Illinois can win the whole thing. And you look at the SEC, sure, they lost a 15-point game against Mississippi State. They lost a game against Auburn and against Georgia, but they did win on the road against Arkansas by 13 and at Tennessee by 9. So when I look at that, I'm like, wow, Missouri can beat a lot of good teams. And for them to get a 9 in Gonzaga's bracket is, I think the Tigers should be the ones complaining more than anyone.
It's crazy because if you think about it, you remember the original when the committee put out their original 16 teams. They had Missouri as a 4. How did they go all the way from a 4 to a 9? I know you lose games late season, and I know they didn't. They ended the season not in the top 16 in terms of like the actual AP top 25. But still, there's no way Missouri should be a 9. They have one of the best resumes in the field, and I could easily like if you compare teams just head to head, I would easily take Missouri over a 6 Texas Tech. I would take Missouri over a 5 Villanova, and you could argue Missouri is better than Virginia. So. I think that a 9 is too low, and it sucks because they're playing the best team in the tournament if they do win their first round game. So it just sucks for them.
Well, I don't think Missouri is going to be pulling off any upsets against Gonzaga for how much I've talked good about them. That was a big time one. But I do want to transition into upsets now. Vando, I know you love to pick some upsets in your brackets. I'm going to toss out no 8-9s, no 7-10s. I don't even want to hear like an 11-6 if it's like a power conference team over a 6 seed, because to me, that's not even a big time upset. I want to hear what mid-major opponents do you have winning a game in the first round? Or is there like a 7 or an 8 or a 6 seed that maybe beats the 3 and makes a run into like the Elite 8? Like what's like a crazy long Cinderella upset you got?
Okay. I was gonna say Michigan State, but that's a cop out because they're better than 11, and we know we know what they can do, and we know how good their coach is. So I'm not gonna do that. I have Syracuse over San Diego State, but I'm not even gonna do that. I'll give you one even better than that. I have Ohio beating Virginia. And just hear me out. This Ohio team is very dangerous. They have a potential draft pick on their team. Like he could even be a first rounder in Justin Preston, triple double threat anytime he walks out on the floor. And I guarantee you, I kid you not, if they do upset Virginia, you're going to be seeing LaMelo Ball comparisons. Maybe not in terms of being like a top 3 pick or anything, just because Justin Preston is literally like LaMelo Ball's college basketball doppelganger. But I really like them. And another upset pick that I'll give you, I like Winthrop over Villanova. Winthrop has 1 loss on the whole year. Villanova is coming into this game without their starting point guard, and Colin Gillespie's usage rate is sky high in terms of the Wildcats. So missing your point guard we saw what happened in the Big East tournament against Georgetown. It just shows that they do need their starting point guard. And I like that. And as far as like a long run, I do have Winthrop in my Sweet 16 actually. I think they can get over Purdue. I feel like Purdue is a little too high ranked, and Winthrop, I feel like once you get over that first round hump, you can build momentum to get to the Sweet 16. So Winthrop is kind of sort of my Cinderella there. But as far as a longer run, and I have them all the way in the Final Four, I think the Oregon Ducks can do it. Um, their schedule, like who they're scheduled to play, really lines up for it. Um, if they do manage to get past VCU, which I heavily expect, they run into an Iowa team who shoots the lights out and has probably the best big man in the country. But Oregon matches up really well with them. Oregon is a very long team. They're rangy. They're fast. They shoot. They play defense, and I think they have the makings of what it takes to go deep. Um, and if I'm just blindly looking at this tournament field, and I'm doing the eye test, that's something I like to do. And that's probably what I got criticized for a lot in college when I pick my upsets. But if I'm doing the eye test and I'm looking at teams and how they match up, Oregon is much closer to a three-seeded Kansas than Arkansas is to Kansas. They're underseeded with that 7. And sometimes when you're underseeded, it definitely shows in the tournament when you go up against the big dogs. Because Oregon, even though on paper the matchup may seem like it's heavily in Iowa's favor, I feel like they can give them a good run for their money. And Kansas has been coming into their own late in this season, but I do feel like Oregon can make that run. They play in one of the hardest regions because they would have to run into Gonzaga if they do manage to get past Kansas. But I feel like just the makeup of their team and the way they play, they have what it takes to make a deep run.
I actually have a couple of I mean, I don't have that Oregon pick, but I totally see where you're coming from. I know that's been a popular pick. I agree with you on Ohio. I think Preston, even if Virginia wasn't dealing with whatever COVID problems they might be dealing with, which I don't think are like huge issues as far as I've heard, I still think that, I mean, Ohio scores like 86 points a game. That's got to be something. And this Virginia team is, although their defense is still really, really good, I don't think it's one of their better defenses compared to past years. So Ohio could expose that. Um, I'll throw a few more. This is going to sound weird that I'm even calling it an upset. So I guess I'll just try to come up with a different word and say an unpopular pick, and that's Villanova in the Sweet 16. Um, Only because I see a lot of people picking Winthrop because of Colin Gillespie being out. And I look at it the opposite way. I don't think North Carolina, Wisconsin, Villanova, Winthrop, Purdue, neither of them are getting past Baylor. And I look at Jay Wright as the best coach out of those teams, and I say maybe he'll get them 2 rounds, even without Gillespie. I have the Colgate pick. That's been a popular pick. I think it's kind of like a no harm, no foul, especially because even if I had Arkansas, I've got Utah State going 2 rounds. I think Nehemias Queta is one of the best bigs in the
I
entire
definitely agree with
country.
you.
He's talented. And then one or two more quick ones. I have UNC Greensboro over Florida State, but kind of like the Villanova pick, I got Colorado going a couple of rounds. I know people are taking Georgetown, but look, I don't see who on Georgetown is guarding McKinley Wright. And if you can give me a name, I dare you, because there's no one on that team who can keep McKinley Wright. And even then, I have LSU in that same bracket going to the Elite Eight. So that bracket's a mess with
Wow.
me. But LSU, I think people are going to realize how fun of a team they are, and they're going to realize that Cameron Thomas is legit. I wrote on it in a Daily Knicks article that'll be coming out soon. So I'll give you a quick scoop of Vando because I know you're a Knicks fan as well. But I think if the Knicks drafted Cameron Thomas, it wouldn't exactly be a bad thing.
Oh my gosh. Cam Thomas oozes with potential. I know he's a streaky shooter and he's high volume, but he's a flat out scorer. He knows how to put the ball in the basket. And that's something that's few and far between at his age. I think that region, Michigan, the East region, is going to have the most varying teams in terms of who comes out of that bracket. So although I don't necessarily agree with the LSU pick, I don't blame you for picking it because that I feel like that region is going to have a lot of parity in it. And I think the two teams that will be playing in that Elite Eight definitely won't be 1 versus 2. That's for sure. Colorado and the Georgetown situation. I know Georgetown's reeling, but come on, Colorado was before they lost in the final. They were 24th ranked in the country. Georgetown, nobody on. Maybe this is being biased again, but nobody on Georgetown can check McKinley Wright. McKinley Wright has the makings of a late first rounder, early second rounder, and nobody on that Georgetown's guarding him. They're a well coached team, well oiled machine, and they're not losing to Georgetown. I don't care what type of upset you can predict, but Georgetown. they're just playing right at the right time. But I would definitely still take Colorado. So I want to see that LSU thing though, because I know LSU, they score a lot of points, and so does Michigan. Michigan had a couple 90-point games this year, so that'll be a very fun game to see.
Colorado also one of the least prone turnover teams in the country. They only have one guy, and that's Wright, and he leads them in turnovers at just 2.1 a game. I mean, to have the ball in your hands all the time and only cough it up twice a game, this Colorado team's a lot better than people are giving them credit for. And sometimes I think that's where you got to make picks because, again, like in that side of the bracket, I don't see. If you have a team going to the Final Four, just mess with the other side of that bracket. Like I am so confident that Texas is going to make it to the Final Four that I'm screwing with that whole bracket. And if it ends in a fluke, then oh well. But I'd rather do that than mess around and really try to pick games that everyone else might have.
And that's exactly the thing that you have to go for. If you look at the odds of Gonzaga making it to the title game in terms of who picked them, and just going off of ESPN's tournament challenge, 35% of people have them in the Final Four. That's a lot. And as we've seen in previous years, it may not be the easiest thing to pick, So we'll definitely have to see that.
I want to get to Final Four picks and our national champions in a second, but here's an interesting one. We've seen it done before. Give me a team seeded 8 or higher that can make the Final Four.
8 or higher. Yeah, it's a difficult year to make the Final Four. It's some really talented teams that you'd have to get past. But one name that one team that I've been seeing getting some buzz is Loyola Chicago. And hear me out. I know they're playing Illinois, and I know Illinois is a popular pick. But if we just flash back to that Cinderella story that they had a couple years when they went to the Final Four, this team is better than that team. Their best player was a freshman. He was a freshman starter on that team, and now he's a senior. He's grown a lot. But if you just look at the numbers, they would blow that team out the water that they beat. And I know Georgia Tech is going to be without Moses Wright, so that's an advantage for them. They get some momentum if they can get past them for that first round game. And they match up well with Illinois. I mean, Illinois is a very deep team. They have probably the best duo in the country. But the thing is, with these Cinderella runs, it's like once you knock off that heavily favored team, you have a great chance to go deep. I can just remember thinking back to, they didn't go to the Final Four, but just thinking back to when Florida Gulf Coast made their run. Georgetown, like almost everybody had Georgetown in that game. There was nobody that was picking Florida Gulf Coast. I feel like their odds are probably less than 1% to get to the Sweet 16, but they still made it happen, and the game wasn't even close. They beat them by nearly 20 points, if not more. So sometimes all it takes is just getting past that one team, and you can go deep in the tournament. So there are a lot of teams that I believe are capable of that. And one thing you can guarantee is that there is going to be a high seed with heavy expectations that doesn't live up to that. That almost happens every March Madness. So who that team is going to be, we'll just have to see and find out.
I have one team in particular, and then kind of two more where it's an either or. Virginia Tech. They have wins over Villanova and Virginia, so it's a team that knows how to beat some really, really good teams. And then you look at their matchups. I think I have them beating Florida. I really think that they'll beat Florida in that one. Ohio State doesn't scare me. I think Virginia Tech could take down Ohio State. And you get past them, and it's, again, if you're going chalk, it's Arkansas or Texas Tech. I think they're a team that could get there at least to the Elite Eight, and if they're hot, maybe ride it to the Final Four. And then there's two teams in the lower right portion of the Midwest bracket, and that's my Syracuse Orange and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And I look at that again as you look at, if you go chalk, I think that both Syracuse and Rutgers can beat Houston and or West Virginia. There's nothing about that too. Like I look at other brackets and you look at Alabama and Texas, and I'm like, wow, that's scary. And then Iowa and Kansas, they're going to know how to coach. But when it's Houston and West Virginia, okay, I started to think maybe Ron Harper Jr. and Buddy Boeheim get hot, and all of a sudden this is a game. That's just some thoughts that I had on that.
I definitely think that uh, Syracuse can beat San Diego State. I had that pick in my bracket. And you're definitely right, Matt. There's nothing scary about West Virginia and Houston. I know Houston allows nearly 50 points per game, one of the best defensive teams in the country, just based off of that stat. But West Virginia, they don't scare me as a 3 seed. You look at a Texas, you look at a Kansas, and you look at a Arkansas. I feel like West Virginia is the third or fourth best 3 seed. They could be upset. And I feel like they rely so heavily on points in the paint that if you're a 3-point shooting team and you're shooting the lights out, they're not going to be able to keep up because they don't shoot the three that well or they don't take a lot of them. So I could definitely see that.
We'll finish our little picks here out with your Final Four and your national champion.
Okay, I'm just gonna start off by saying that Baylor, Gonzaga, Michigan, and Illinois are not in this. So if you're one of those listeners and you're expecting a chalky bracket, that's not what I produce, and that's not what I think. Um, the first Final Four team that I have is Ohio State. They ranked really high in terms of BPI, and just watching them in that championship game against Illinois, that game could have went either way. They were down 3 and they fouled. I don't know why, and that changed the whole dynamic of the overtime, and they ended up losing by way more than they should have, and didn't even give themselves a chance to win that. The second team I have in my Final Four that will be playing them is Oklahoma State. Cade Cunningham, I think he should go number one overall. One of the best prospects in the country. There isn't really much that I need to say about him if you don't know who Cade Cunningham is. If you don't know how good he is, you really haven't been watching college basketball. And I think even though I don't have them in my Final Four, the winner of that Illinois Oklahoma State game will come out of that region. And I'm just betting that Cade Cunningham, if the game is clutch, he's going to close it out. They were really hot coming down the stretch, beat 3 top 15 teams, and they're really capable of doing it. And on the other side of the bracket, coming out of that East region, I do have Florida State. I think the Seminoles, they're right, they're seated in the correct place, but they have one of the best records, and they have the best record in the ACC over the last 2 years. They've been winning a lot of games, and the scariest part about their team, if you don't know already, is the fact that they have 8 guys who can lead them in scoring on any night. If that doesn't open your eyes, I don't know what will. They're a team that is for the team. There's no individuals on that team. There is no player that puts himself above the team, and that's just the way Leonard Hamilton coaches. He's a great coach, and he's one of those under the radar coaches in terms of the larger college basketball picture. And I feel like when it comes down to it, they can go far, and they've shown the potential to get there in recent years. And my last team they're coming out of the West region is Oregon. I think the Ducks, if we flash back maybe a month ago, I think the Ducks would have received a 7, and that's something I probably said 3 times already. I think they should be more closer to a 4 or a 5. And I think there's way too much hype for Gonzaga. Gonzaga is a good team. They were battle tested in their non-conference schedule, beat Virginia by 20, 10-point win over Kansas, and a lot of other good non-conference wins, even beating Iowa. They know how to score. They're a very difficult team to beat. But I feel like when there's so much heavy expectations, I feel like a team doesn't always do that well. I think about the Duke team with Zion Williamson, and I think about mostly about that Wisconsin team with Frank Kaminsky, Sam Decker, and all those boys. And I feel like when a team is so heavily favored, plus 215 odds to win a national title, I feel like they're gonna lose along the way. And Matt, I like what you said about Missouri and the fact that they're very underseeded. I feel like Gonzaga is going to be worn down by a Creighton team that should have probably won the Big East, a Missouri team that seeded way too low, and then when you run into Oregon, who I have them playing in that Elite Eight game, I feel like they'll be worn down by then, and Oregon will be just hot and shooting the lights out. And that's my team, and I feel like a lot of people won't have them in the Final Four just because they'll have to go up against Gonzaga or any other team in that region. So Oregon, Florida State, Ohio State, and Oklahoma State for my Final Four. I think when you look at the championship game, you have or I would have Oregon getting past Florida State, and then I would have Oklahoma State upsetting the 2 seed in Ohio State. I think the Buckeyes match up very well with them. But I'm just riding this hot streak that Oklahoma State's going on, and I have them playing Oregon in the national championship game. Oklahoma State reminds me a lot of that 2003 team with Carmelo Anthony when they went all the way to the Final Four. You had Melo averaging like near 20 points, Final Four MVP, Hakeem Warwick, and some other good guys on that team. And with this Oklahoma State team, you have a really young team led by Cade, and you have Likely, Anderson pitching in points, and you have a decent supporting cast coming off the bench. I feel like they're a lot reminiscent of that team, and the team that they beat, team that Syracuse beat along the way, are similar to the teams that Oklahoma State will have to run into. I think Illinois is the matchup that everybody's going to be waiting for. That Sweet 16 matchup with Oklahoma State and Illinois will be good, but I would take the Cowboys in that, as I mentioned before. This year is going to be tricky in terms of predicting the bracket. I feel like it's going to be more chalky than previous years just because of the fact that there's no fans. And I feel like the underseeded team in that case would be at a disadvantage. When you do have fans, you build momentum. You got your band playing behind you. You got people in the stands rooting for you. But when you don't have that, you have a limited amount of fans. I think they're going to allow a limited amount of fans. That's going to make things a lot more difficult to pull off those upsets. So it's going to come down to late game execution. It's going to come down to who has the hot hand. And I feel like Oklahoma State has the makings of a team who can go deep. I read an article a few years ago on what it takes to make the Final Four, and there's some key elements there. You have to be a good three-point shooting team. You have to be a team that and gets on the glass, and I think Oklahoma State checks both of those boxes. It'll be interesting to see how far they can go.
Well, that's your Final Four and champion, and I got mine real quick. I have I'll start in the West. I have Gonzaga coming out of the West. I just think that they're the toughest team to beat in this entire tournament, and I just don't know who can match up with them. From Drew Timme to Corey Kispert to Jalen Suggs and Nemhard and everyone else in there, I think that they've got that down pat in the West. In the East, I have Texas. Matt Coleman, Andrew Jones. I think this Texas team is loaded with experienced guards who can get it done. I like the bracket that they're in. I think Michigan is very overrated. I'm not a huge fan of Hunter Dickinson. And I've got Texas going to the Final Four in the East. In the Midwest, I agree with you. I have Oklahoma State. I have them beating Houston. I think Houston hasn't been getting a lot of love, but I just have Oklahoma State. I think they're one of the hottest teams in this, and they've got the best player in Cade Cunningham. And Baylor is my fourth team. That's the bracket that I'm not the most confident about, but I have Baylor in the Final Four out of the South. So again, my Final Four, I have Gonzaga beating Texas, Oklahoma State beating Baylor, and I have Oklahoma State giving Gonzaga their first loss of the season to become national champions. So we both like Oklahoma State a lot, and that kind of leads us into our next segue. I was fortunate enough to talk with an Oklahoma State beat writer, Frank Bonner. He writes for the Tulsa World about the Cowboys. And we're going to go to the interview where I talked about Oklahoma State with Frank right now. So welcome back to Hall the Sports. Frank Bonner with me. He writes for the Tulsa World, covers Oklahoma State Cowboys basketball. Frank, thanks for joining us here on Hall the Sports.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to hop on and talk a little OSU basketball.
So now, how long have you been writing for the Tulsa World on Oklahoma State?
It'll be 2 years in June.
2 years, and you're already having probably one of the best years anyone could have covering a team in college hoops this season.
Yeah, I mean they've got the potential #1 overall pick, the top high school prospect, in Cade Cunningham, and they've got a coach in Mike Boynton who's really hot right now and a young roster, and yeah, it's been exciting covering this team.
Well, there's a lot here to talk about, but I want to start with kind of your initial reaction to Oklahoma State's seed, because here's a team that really finished the season as strong as anyone in the country. I had them as a 2 or a 3 seed. Then they get a 4 seed. I just wanted to see your thought process if you thought maybe they were a little bit underseeded or not.
Yeah, I thought it was odd. I definitely thought it was strange going into that Big 12 championship game against Texas. I was like, well, if they win this game, they're probably a 2 seed, and if they lose, they're a 3 seed, and then they come out being a 4. And um, the most strange thing was the fact that West Virginia in the same region was given the 3 seed, and OSU beat them in back-to-back games. I mean, West Virginia ended their season with 2 losses to OSU, and somehow they still end up being a seed higher in the same region. So I thought it was pretty odd how the committee, kind of shook that part up.
Not only that, but with a tough 13 seed against Liberty as well. But before we go into tournament talk, I do want to hit on one thing before we go into, the NCAA tournament. And it really has to do with Mike Boynton. He's done a terrific job as coach, but as a black coach in a sport that's lost, 2 really polarizing black coaches in John Thompson and John Chaney over the past few months, I just wanted to get your take on why it's important that black coaches continue to rise in collegiate coaching and how they can continue to change the landscape in the favor of more black coaches.
Well, I think, you know, the more they continue to do well, whether it's, Shaka Smart, Mike Boynton, it opens doors for other black coaches to get a chance. And so I think, and Mike Boynton is great at saying those things, and he takes ownership of the responsibility to open doors for other black coaches. And so when you have black coaches specifically like Boynton doing well, he wants to bring as many people with him as he can. And I think it's great to see, and it's important that we applaud black coaches like Boynton, who takes ownership of that and understands the magnitude of the position he's in to open those doors. And that part of it's been a pleasure to cover him, and what he's been doing with the program in terms of wins and losses. But that part of him has also been a pleasure to see how outspoken he is about things like that. And coaches like him will be the ones who open doors for other coaches coming behind him.
And I think that's key, that he doesn't have to separate his opinions and what he thinks is right from basketball. He's able to do it both. And that's why he's such a great leader as well. But going back to Oklahoma State as a team, besides the obvious talent that Cade Cunningham has, how else has he helped Oklahoma State throughout the season?
He's made everybody else better. And I think that's what great players do. It's not all about their success; it's about the success of other players. And in the magnitude of Cunningham, like his presence will still be felt next year when he's gone. When you look at the development of the rest of this roster, and you look at like a guy like Avery Anderson, who's really come out strong this year. A lot of that can be credited to the trust that Cunningham puts in his teammates. Like he knows that he's the best player on the team, but he also feels, that he's surrounded with other great players, and he gives them the confidence to go make plays, even though, Cade Cunningham is right next to you. And so I think, if you're a young freshman or sophomore and you look at a Cade Cunningham, and Cade Cunningham is looking at you, expecting you to, go do your thing and make plays, on your own, you have to believe that you can do that too. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that he's done for his teammates.
Well, Frank, you mentioned how Cade obviously makes his teammates better. Who do you think is a teammate that perhaps needs to take that and really step up, and if the Cowboys want to take that and go on a tournament run?
I think it's Avery Anderson right now. Well, I would say Avery Anderson and Caleb Boone. I think they need both of them to really have good tournaments, especially with Caleb being in the inside in the post. when OSU goes against a team that has big forwards, Caleb and M.A. Moncrief, they are going to need to deliver on the boards defensively. They're going to need to score some points to take the pressure off their guards. And then down the stretch, obviously Cade Cunningham is your guy, but I think Avery Anderson has, presented himself as another option to score points for you late in games. And I think that's going to be huge for OSU when teams are having to decide how to guard Cunningham and also have to worry about Avery Anderson, who's probably their best ISO player on the team. And so you're going to see, Boynton use that in situations in the tournament.
Now, we've seen this Liberty game as a game that on paper Oklahoma State has the better talent, but some people view it as a trap game. I wanted to see your take on how you think Oklahoma State maybe matches up with Liberty.
I can see why people see it as a trap game. I do think that OSU will come out on top, but it definitely is, not the greatest matchup for OSU in terms of a 13 seed that they could have had. Liberty doesn't turn the ball over. I think when I looked, they were like 9.7 turnovers a game. They don't allow a lot of fast break points, and OSU is at their best when they're in transition. And they also have had turnover problems this year. And so if you look at those two stats, that could present some issues for this OSU team. Because if you're turning the ball over a lot and the other team isn't, then that's more possessions for them. And, I think, a lot of people have compared them to a Virginia style of basketball, Liberty. And so, you don't want to give them extra possessions because you're not going to have a lot of possessions in this game. And so I think those are the two things that OSU needs to be concerned with.
So it definitely could turn into maybe more of a defensive game then. I don't want to look too far ahead, but I kind of do because that's the fun of March Madness. So let's say Oklahoma State makes it to the Sweet 16. Kofi Cockburn would be a tough matchup for anyone. When you look at this Cowboys team, who do you think would match up with Cockburn if those two teams do face off?
Well, I mean, it down the stretch, Cunningham can guard 1 through 5. You know what I mean? And so I think you have versatility there. Boynton is not afraid to put Likely on 1 through 5. And so I know you may look at matchups and who sizes well and so on, but Boynton's gonna want to put his best defenders on guys. And so I think you're gonna see, Cunningham probably stretch himself on both sides of the floor in a matchup like that. Because he's so versatile. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him.
I got to agree with you there. I think that could be a real interesting take, and that could be a way to slow Illinois down. I'll even look further ahead. I'm up in Syracuse right now. Here's something that's really crossed my mind over the last few weeks. You look at Syracuse's 2003 run, Carmelo Anthony, stud freshman. The rest of that roster was pretty young as well. They only had one senior that started, and Syracuse started the season unranked, entered the AP poll in mid-January, ended up with a 3 seed. They had to beat 2 1 seeds on their run. And I say all that because I see Oklahoma State themselves with a stud forward freshman, a young roster, a team that's entered the AP poll pretty late, and they've got a 4 seed. And if they want to make that long of a run in the tournament, they'll probably have to beat a couple number 1 seeds as well. I don't know if you saw that similarity at all either, but I guess what I'm getting at is, do you look at this young roster and see if they're capable of putting together a long run?
Yeah, if you look at OSU in this last stretch that they've had, ending the game or ending the regular season with that 5-game stretch of all top 20 teams, and then you turn around and play even more top 20 talent in the conference tournament, they showed that they can compete with the best programs in the country. And so I think that OSU has the talent and they've been battle tested enough to put themselves in position to have a chance to win in the final minutes. And then once you get in that position, you're going to have the best player on the floor. And so if you're Mike Boynton, you like your chances against anybody because you compete hard enough to give yourself a chance. And then, Cade Cunningham is Cade Cunningham. And so I do think that they will have a chance to beat any team they play.
Frank, I'll leave you with one more. What's the biggest key for Oklahoma State as March Madness starts up on Friday?
Turnovers. This team is, they're going to compete hard. And so that's number one. Number two, defensively, they're going to pretty much be defensively sound. You can't shoot yourself in the foot by having too many turnovers. And that's been an issue for them. And so I think if they keep their turnovers down, they'll have a chance to make a long run.
Well, Frank, thank you again for joining us on Hall of the Sports. For our followers, if you'd like to follow his coverage this tournament, you can follow him on Twitter at Frank_Bonner2. Thanks again, Frank. Frank Bonner from the Tulsa World. And again, Evando Thompson was on with me earlier. I'm just going to close this out. Let's get ready for March. Everyone's been talking for this whole week. We've had an extra day to talk college hoops. Normally that first four would have been Tuesday, Wednesday. It's not until tonight. And I'm going to release this so everyone can get their first four games on the TV and get your minds focused ahead to the round of 64 because it is March and it's the best time of the year for college basketball fans. I know everyone else has their own picks, but hopefully you trust Evando and I because we know what we're talking about as well. And let's get ready for March. So again, if you're listening to us on SoundCloud, watching us on YouTube, whatever it is, make sure to share, make sure to like, comment, tell us your picks for the 2021 NCAA tournament. And for that, this is All the Sports.